Hello future tech leaders, I am Sindhuja. Based on my own experience, I know that learning the right skills can shape our future. What if I say learning was as thrilled as the tech world itself? There we go. A cloud foundation, that's exactly what you will experience. From day one, you will be immersed in the interactive sessions and expert-led courses that covers most of the widely used technologies in the zone of data science to cloud computing, which brings more light to the life of a techie. I'm so excited to help you and unlock the true potential of a technology. Well, then why to wait? Let's see what it unfolds.
Why are we using benefits of Boomi compared to other integration tools? Boomi is for user friendly from the UI perspective, and it has like very less coding components in comparison to other integration tools. That is one of the primary reasons why many companies prefer using Boomi just for very simple purpose. It's easier for their employees to use. It's like very UI friendly. Now all these integration tools like Boomi, MoldSoft and others, they all offer like almost similar level of capabilities like integrations, APIs, data catalogs, data management. It's basically just different modes of playing around with data. That is like the very base information about Boomi in compared to other tools. I have a question. Since we have other tools as well in comparison to Boomi, why do you consider Boomi? Why do you consider Boomi? Because there will be chances like not everyone is trained in coding languages the team members or the team you are interested to use in integrations tool with. What Boomi? The Boomi offers capabilities where you can just drag and drop shapes in the UI simply and the whole code would be running in behind the scenes. You don't need to type in your Java, Python, JavaScript, all those codes. But when you connect with other systems, sometimes it is required to have some coding experience. That is necessary at that moment. Companies where they use Boomi as integration tools, they have their other application teams as well, which are the sources system application teams and target application teams, where they handle the coding related to their applications. Usually, integration teams are just restricted to using the integration tools like Boomi only. You would just be accessing the other systems. Why? To test the data or just do some basic configuration of Boomi A, P, I or something like that. Thank you. That is why companies push for this Boomi. I have a question. Can we Electra there is an interface for coding as well or like there is only an interface for UI? There is an interface only for UI, but there could be cases where you are well versed with accessibility like XML based mapping transformations. We can do some coding here. Yes, you can do your coding as well, but not a full-fledged coding. Like if you want to write up some transformation logics, like if in statements of for loops, basic kind of algorithm, like basic stuff you can do. Nothing like overly complicated. I have a couple of questions. Previous to that, I've worked on a stream sets where we have a provision like we can also drag and drop. The sources and the few destinations are already defined. Is it same with the Bhumi as well? And another question is suppose from the source side, if we are seeing that data is changed or the format of the data is changed or some new columns are added or removed. In that case, is it going to manage the drift as well? No, that has to be taken care of manually. That is like just a brief overview. Now before we Bhumi is basically your iPaaS integration platform as a service. It is offered as iPaaS. Basically like iPaaS, where you can use the whole integration platform, which you can deploy either on cloud or in your local service as well. That is its use case. Now the type of capabilities Bhumi offers is 3-4 types. Basically, one is your cloud-based, one is your on-premise, that is your local, and another one is hybrid. Cloud is where everything is managed by Bhumi. Automated scaling. You don't need to set up any infrastructure on your end. Once your company purchases the license and subscription with Bhumi, you just simply log in into UI and start using the application. It's fully managed, like with the disaster management and disaster recovery and 99.99% availability of production, environment and everything. Where you don't need to worry about your infrastructure at all. That is the cloud capability, and majorly everyone uses cloud capability. And Bhumi's cloud servers, they are hosted with AWS at their data centers. Another kind of setup is on-premise setup, local deployments. Basically, you can have your servers stacked up in your organization where you don't want data to flow outside. There you use on-premise systems for businesses where they are more of like security oriented and they want to ensure their privacy. There they use this kind of setup on premise applications. But then the major goal for them is just data security. No other reason. Because like this could be due to country-based regulations or restrictions with the privacy. Usually it is with like Gulf countries or China and around, or if suppose you're using it for your military or something you would like the control over your data. There is one use case of this on-premise setup. Now, hybrid setup is something like half of your servers are running on cloud and half of your servers are running on premise. Suppose you are running MMNC, some like a multi-billion-dollar corporation. There are your company's offices based in few countries where there are restrictions to data privacy and security, but then other countries it's flexible enough and there are no such data privacy concerns. In that kind of cases, you go for hybrid setup. Basically, in countries where it's not restricted, you just put it out in cloud, and in countries where it's restricted, you restrict it out to those servers. That way you can have a control. I have a question. Can you switch from on-premise to cloud? Like there is a migration also. Yes, you can do that. That you will have to work out with usually like Boomi team, because you're again licensing and everything will change. But then the migration process would be easy. It's not going to be true because your account, the items here in which it all runs, is going to be in the same account ID. It will be just fine. Next is private cloud deployment. This is like for restricting it out furthermore, but in cloud only. Now, you don't want the hybrids like a local on premise setup, but you want your data or to be like a little more secure, but in the cloud. What you can opt for is like any other service provider. If you want to go for, you can do that, or something like have a separate rack for yourself. All those capabilities are offered under this one. Basically, the regular cloud is public cloud. Like you would be just having your virtual spaces under private cloud, there would be a dedicated rack and everything for your organization. Now this on-premise one, it is go ahead. I have one question. You mentioned about the cloud. Whenever we are going to deploy it, like do we have any private VPC for that? Or it is just that created by the Boomi? No, there is not going to be anything such as VPC load balancers. It would all be automatically managed by Boomi. How will it manage for a private cloud deployment? Like, what is your question exactly? We are using something like Boomi is using something for private cloud deployment. What is it using? No, basically Boomi will install your Atom on which basically Atom is a mesh server on which it all runs. It will just dedicate a CPU to you, basically private CPU, rather than giving you a virtual space. That's the only difference. And on-premise. Again, there are two types of installations. One is Atom and one is Molecule. Atom is basically you buy one big CPU and run everything on it. That is like a single unit you're running it on. That is called Atom. Another kind of deployment model is called Molecule, where you have multiple atoms running in it as a cluster. Basically, instead of having one big CP, you put up 10 different CP. Use for fault tolerance, disaster recovery, high availability, scalability, all those kinds of things. In case, like if you don't want the whole burden to fall on just one machine, you divided it among 10 for having it run 10 processes at the same time in parallel, or if one of them goes down or is up for repair, the other systems can keep running your process without having to stop the whole machine. That is the use case for this deployment model. I do have a question here, Rishi. Basically, all these deployment modes you're mentioning. Because, for example, this Molecule one, do we have these? I mean the predefined configurations on the Boomi console. I mean, for example, if we are saying that rather than taking a single machine, we are taking it a multiple machine, that it could be a fault tolerant. Definitely there will be some cost involved here. And we have to make sure that the organization, wherever we are doing the setup, how much cost it will be applying for. All these kinds of configurations and all those things Informations are available at the time of deployment itself. And while we are configuring these molecules, it would be two things. One, yes, there would be one Boomi person like. When you buy the Boomi license and purchase it, there will be a Boomi technical support staff that would be guiding you through the process with what? Based on your company's requirement and the amount of data that would be flowing through. They would help you understand the volume and everything. Second, yes, there will be default limits set on everything which you can minimize or maximize in the limit range based on the requirement. Limit is fine. And the one thing that you are asking, that I mean the expert, Boomi expert will suggest that this should be the perfect configuration, but I'm asking about in respect of any cloud provider. When we spin up any cluster or any VM machine, at that time, we have that some idea. For this particular configuration, we will be charging like this much amount. Is that similar feature we have in Boomi? Maybe we can have it. There is not a direct price calculator available like this. It's usually worked out with the sales team and the technical team. We have to resize the requirement from our end that this is what the requirement from our perspective, and they will suggest that this will be the perfect configuration for our use case or something. That's what it happened. Like you have this feature in AWS GCP and everything where for a service you can run the price calculator based on your data size, whatever the price would come, estimated cost. Boomi does not have that. It runs a little differently, licensing system here. Although sure, all those configuration done by this Boomi persons or the and we are the person who will be doing this. We are going to do it ourselves. They will just guide us through with if you're stuck anywhere. Got. I have a question. Molecules are basically the cluster and molecules are just, dividing the cluster into small configuration are the molecules. Is that correct? Molecular cluster. It's the same thing which is like a group of atoms like individual units. They're grouped together. That is either called a molecule or a cluster. It's the same thing. Did it make sense? It does. I'll skip on these because we will deep dive into all this a little later. For now, understanding about this is enough. As we progress towards API and data catalog preparation, I'll explain on this, but to just give you a brief understanding, it's basically for managing your APIs using Boomi. You create your APIs in Boomi and you expose it to other applications, and data catalog is basically for data analytics and business intelligence, basically like integrating it with your databases. That's it. And just some basic understanding about it. Our major focus will be on this first, basically on just understanding, getting a brief idea of how the deployment models and everything works in Boomi. Next we'll move. What we'll move to is integration design patterns. Basically, integration design patterns are like how you are going is for like understanding the frameworks or like kind of integrations you're going to design and different kind of applications with which different kind of these design patterns work. The most basic one is ETL, which you would have heard like multiple times maybe, like some of you would have heard about it. ETL is basically extract, transform, load. It's like a very basic design pattern where you simply pull your data from a source application, do some basic transformation and just load it into a target application. This is usually ETL method is basically used for where you have your millions of records, basically a company's database about customers, say a telecom company. It would have like millions of records about different customers and everything or the calls and all that would be flowing. In that kind of scenarios, you would use ETL design pattern. Basically, you're doing minimal transformation and for a quicker, efficient data flow, you use this design pattern. And this is for like batch data processing. Basically, you move like in a single batch. You move like a million or a lakh records together. And it is usually in a scheduled method towards like end of the day, you are updating your databases or something like that. Another design pattern is real-time integration. Real-time integrations. One of the most simplest example to understand is you use different shopping applications like Flipkart, Amazon and all that. They have real-time integration. Basically, suppose you search for a product on Amazon, say you're searching for an iPhone. You do a search. That request will route through your integration tool to the warehouse where they are having the whole inventory. Your search result will return. You will see if iPhone is available or out of stock. Once that is done, you will add to cart. It will block the iPhone again in the warehouse. It comes back, you purchase it. It's all the actions related to that iPhone purchase is happening in real time. That is where you use this kind of design pattern. Basically, it's these have to be like super quick. Whenever you're searching for a product and all that, you cannot have heavy logics written over here. They have to be usually pretty like straightforward, like calls, lookup calls, and that kind of stuff. They will be of like low latency, like milliseconds to seconds. Basic understanding about real-time integration. We'll deep dive in all of this later. Another one is event-driven integrations. Simple example of event-driven integration is you built your integration in Boomi. You exposed it as an API tool, some HR application as Workday, PeopleSoft, SuccessFactor, any of it, just let's say Workday, for example. Now, if one of the employees getting promoted in real time, you do not want to run it every day. You just want your integration to be triggered whenever an employee's information is updated, and like update is payroll and everything like all other software's interconnected systems. There you use this kind of architecture design framework where suppose this job information is updated. You send it to all the like target applications, be it payroll, be it some just portal update in the UI or something like that. There you use this kind of design pattern Basically where you like. You know once, shoot out the information. You're not bothered about the response back. Next is your batch schedule integration. Basically, it's like you are scheduling your, as the meaning implies, you are running or processing your data in batches or at scheduled times. Suppose if you are designing your integrations for a finance organization, they just want to receive currency rates every morning once they are updated at some another website or something. You can schedule it for every day. That is reasonable. How does batch schedule integration is different than ETL? Because I guess in ETL also we can schedule the jobs which can be work as the batch. How is it different than ETL? Batch schedule integration doesn't necessarily, it's not necessary. It would have, like millions of records. Whereas ETL, whenever we are using it, is associated with when there is a very high volume of data. Whereas for your batch schedule integration, in basic terminology, it can have these transformation logics and everything, like quite a few of them. But ETLs are kept simple, and all of these are not like individual design patterns. Again, they are interlinked, but that's like giving the basic framework idea. Based on the use case, we can decide which design pattern we are using. We can be using here. If we say, let's say millions of data that we are trying to process, then we call it as ETL. But if it is not the millions of data, we call it as batch schedule integration. I mean, the pattern would remain the same. But how we are calling it, we name it different. I have a question. As the researcher asked, that ETL and batch schedule, they are the same. It differs from the size of data. Yes, majorly. Like whenever you're picking up your new integrations, whoever is a functional team or the architect, one of the major questions always to the source teams and like to businesses, what is the data size going to be? It is the most essentially asked question because based on data size, we decide upon the whole architecture and what business is expecting will be able to deliver it or not using this integration tool. We decide that. And the whole design patterns for integrations. Like that is the most important thing. Rishi, when we talk about the data size, we talk in terms of the transaction. We talk in terms of the whole warehouse data size. No, we talk in terms of transactions, like number of transactions that are going to happen and even the average transaction size. Simply put, like you have a company running for like 1 million employees, 1 million employees you have. If you're going to run your integrations for, say, on an average daily for like at least 5 like employees, you would set up your measure scale on number of employees, data that would be flowing each day and the size of the say. It comes in an XML format. What would be the average size of a file? Say be it 10K, B1 and be like that. The scale is on that. And XML is something that we get to know once we implement them. How will we get to know the size of XML before even integrating the data and into our system? That would be for the source application team to inform you like what is going to be the average size of a file. That would be flowing through and from the previous records, the expected number of transactions or the data that would be flowing. It is the duty of the application team to share that information with the architect. Alongside that, another important aspect is we should not overlook these target systems, because there will also be limits on the target applications as well, like number of records they can accept in a single go, or like the size of records. There will be a lot to play around with. That way control. End of the day, these all are like API, like REST or SOAP calls like web services, which we look in the UI. They will have their size restrictions, like how much time that connection is open for and everything. We have to control all that. I'll explain all that later. May I ask the question? You have a design pattern here mentioned as message-oriented middleware. How is it different than event-driven? Event-driven is basically when some event is occurring in the other application. You're configuring Boomi's API in their web box. Only when an action occurs, that specific event, say a sale has occurred or some data, particular value has changed. Only then you are sending the request to Boomi. There is message-oriented. You just keep pushing data to Boomi and it will have that messaging queue service. It will store everything in a pipeline and then process the data slowly. There is a difference here. Once you are in there. No, please complete. Basically, message-oriented middleware, it is asynchronous. Like you shoot the data once and you don't shoot just one data, you shoot like multiple. Like it can be like 100,000 lakhs. You just store it in a pipeline. A queue service. Again, these are like interrelated. Event-driven is synchronous. You are saying no. No, that is also asynchronous. Is it not like how an event is different than a message? Because see, you get a message. In case of event also, you expect some event happening. If an event is happening, you get some kind of notification, whether it be a message or that whether it be a kind of ping or something, or your AP, I call something. And in case of message also, you're getting a message based on which the process is kicking off. I'm not understanding the difference between these two. Basically, in your event driven, you would not be, you would. There are high chances you would have a basic acknowledgement that your request has been successfully, at least like received by this Boomi system. Whether it processes or it fails, that is a secondary thing. But you would get an acknowledgement back, at least in your logs. That is one primary thing about event-driven. Whereas in messaging queue based, it just goes to your message queue. You would not even know if it has like probably reached or not. It just gets placed in the pipeline. That is one major difference. But again, message queue that is like a MOM is basically more higher level design pattern. of which the subset is this event-driven integration. This is basically your parent design framework, which has event-driven as like one smaller design framework inside it, like a subset. That's sort of a change. Thank you. Then we have file-based design patterns where we use SFTP, FP, all those kind of things. FTP is where if you can use that file transfer protocol if your Boomi is running on your local server. SFTP is something which you could use over your cloud. Basically, just entering the host and credentials of your SFTP server. And suppose there are some Oracle system or a SIP system which places the file into that FTP folder. There are many systems that have that kind of legacy systems which have these kind of restrictions. Then again, you pick up the file from that file system, do your transformations, and then send it to target application. Majorly file-based integrations are with payroll applications. Because they have this, they are running. Many of them are running on these legacy design patterns. Then another one is, I think there should be enough for now. All these would get a little too much in depth for now. If you like, again what? All of these design patterns which I've explained are just like to get some understanding about like how the design frameworks work. All of these are not like individual units. There will be integration designs in which you will have to use 2 or 3 methods combined. All of them are interrelated. Nothing is completely independent of each other. They could be one could be subset of the other or they're intertwined kind of thing. As in when we start developing, you would get to understand. Now moving on to Boomi. Any questions up until now? All I will take that as no. Once you log in, sorry, just a moment. Once you are logged into your Boomi UI, this is how it is going to look generally. On this left pane, you would see your whole process library, basically where your folders and your integrations are going to be visible and everything. Here, it's just going to be your home screen and everything. Build is your process canvas where you do the whole designing and everything. Deployment deploy pages where you package your integrations and then deploy it. Integration packs are pre-designed integrations offered by Boomi where you don't need to do any configuration designs. Everything is pre-designed as a standard framework. You just need to configure your credentials and you can use these integration packs. Then in Manage, you have your process reporting. Basically, this is for your logging auditing. Here you can check your logs. Then item management is basically about your server and your environment where your, Boomi process is deployed. You configure properties related to your deployed integration. Rest all we look at later. That is a slide brief about this dashboard. Then here you would have your user information, account information. Under these settings, you would have all this where you can again add email alert, all these kind of configurations. Where whatever kind of logs about your Atom, basically your server. Let me just first explain what is Atom. Atom is your server, the CPU, where your Boomi processes, whatever you design run on. That is called Atom. You would keep hearing this word Atom instead of calling it a server in the terminology of Boomi. This is essentially to just add up basic like email alert about your Atom, about its health or execution status, or just whatever user notifications. Authentication is for like two-factor authentication. If you want to just secure your account a little more, you set up with a message or some authentication app. You do that here. Atomsphere API tokens is for if you want to use Boomi services as API. These API tokens we can use outside for calling this API and extract relevant data from Boomi. No, this purpose of this Atomsphere API token is just restricted to using Boomi account related information or your process related information. Not what is happening inside your process or integration. Can I please explain it with an example? You design your Boomi process where you're calling a source system. You are doing your data transformations and pushing it to your target system. Again, all that would have your API calls and everything. Source API, I call target API, I call all that. That is happening inside your process that you cannot control using this Atomsphere API token. Now, but your process is there which you want to deploy it from your some using an API action. You don't want to manually do it via UI. You can't want to configure that action via GitHub, or you want to do it using Postman. You want to deploy your process or undeploy it. You do that using this Atomsphere API. Instead of using Boomi UI, we can go with like Postman also. We have to use these tokens, yes? Atomsphere is basically your whole Boomi UI. Atomsphere. API token is basically for using whatever API services you are seeing here. They can be exposed as an API links and you can run them, essentially. Does it make sense? Then it is your. This is general information about your account and the type of access that you would see it. All this information here. Again, all these are just features. Some of them might work. Some of them might not work based on your company's licenses and everything. These would be automatically enabled. licensing. We will be discussing this one at our in the third session, probably not in first two sessions. First, I would like you to have understanding about, in general, what is present in Boomi. Then later about the Boomi shapes and basic stuff. Then we would move to licensing. Licensing is basically how many connections you are using and how many applications, different applications you're connecting to UC. And this is on which the Boomi's costing works. We'll deep dive into this one properly later. For now, we'll skip it. We don't need to know publisher for now. It will get overly complicated. User management is for. Basically, if you have multiple users in your account, you can either use basic roles defined by Boomi. Now again, like usually, these roles are restricted. No user generally has, all the permissions. If you're a developer, you would just be given a developer role where your access might be limited to just few environments and all. Or if you are just from someone from support team, you might just have only a support like only read role where you can just view but not touch, like modify any data or something. These are like predefined roles which you can control. Another option is custom roles. You can create and assign. Basically, again, if you're moving into admin section, admin part of the team, then all this is essential, like to just know. But again, these are very they have made it very easy for any developer to understand, to control all this information. Rishi, do we have any feature like we can create the user groups here? That let's say if I don't want to manage what kind of roles I want to give to any user and replicate it to some other as well. How can we do that? Oh no, we cannot do that. Let's say if I have a person and he has couple of permissions, here's another user I want to add. How can I replicate the roles of one person to another? Once you write this role, under this role, you would have multiple permissions and everything. To the user, you can just simply assign that role like multiple users you can keep adding in this list. And here in the drop-down, you would see your custom role. You can keep assigning it to multiple users that way only. I will ask the questions on this later when you will be explaining more on this. It is not as big as all those IAM services we have in like AWS, SEO, GCP. It is not very big on this thing. That way. But later we can check this. Then again, our token management is about this Thomas query token where you generate the token here. And here you can see action name, who it was created by, status of it. All that information. Trust rate IP addresses is for basically controlling the IP address ranges. If there are kind of restrictions and you're using you have a firewall and you're running this on a local cloud and something like that on a local ATM. And then SSO is basically a lot of companies have like login, based on their SO like with some authentication provider. This is to enable that option and control all that. Now account libraries is for using jar files where you have written some custom JavaScript codes where you want to use some libraries. In that case, you can manually upload custom jar files basically for using it in your process if you want to use a JavaScript in your code. Let me tell you what publisher and developer is. Basically, it's for if you have your API, and otherwise, if you've designed an integration which you want to push it to Boomi. Like for them that they can use it as an integration pack to offer to other clients' customers. There you can just give your information, like your name, your email address, and just put up a logo, basic information about that. All that. AWS Marketplace, where we defined are in another, people can use it. Yes, like you create your instance images and you put it in public space, something like that. This goes for both the processes and for APIs, publisher information. That's how it works. Document tracking is basically for logging purpose. Suppose you create your processes, say you are running it for you are doing transformation for an HR organization, which you will be transforming the records for, like say 10,000 employees per day, that much data you would process. There would be records for 10,000 employees. It could have their departments. It could have their job roles like system engineer, senior system engineer, or the employee IDs or something. If you do not enable like track fields, you would just see it as, log like line transaction records in rows, line by line. There would be no identifier tag on them to know, like it belongs to which employee ID, or there will be no identification. Document tracking comes into picture with you are having high volumes of data and you want to be able to identify your logs document based on a particular kind of primary field or this key you define upon. Suppose say, as I was explaining, for this employee information we have 10,000 of records. We can have, set it up on a simple field, something like employee ID. I would just specify it here as ID and click. This would be now saved as track fields. Now, when I define my source connection, my Boomi process, or that and then targets, I can use this employee ID field or storing that ID of the employee. For all your processes in Boomi, like when you have a Boomi account and you're doing a project, it would not just be restricted to one application. They will be like you're doing integration with 10 or 10 applications, 10, 20, 5, whatever, and different guys will be working. Everyone's tracked fields they will have to specify here. It would not be restricted to your particular user account or something. It would be applicable for all of the applications whichever are going to run here. It's just not user restricted. It would be for the whole account or organization. Whoever uses Boomi, everyone will be able to see these fields here. Don't we define the process for which this will be the tracked field? I mean, we can have another process where we have employee ID or another kind of ID, but employee ID is not the primary tracking key which we have wanted. That is a different use case. What you're talking about? This is like, just for logging information, nothing is. Like, if you just want to view your logs based on a particular ID, doesn't have to be employee ID, whatever you define it as, just for viewing, logging information only. This is for, it does not have any other implications. Structure related information and where you would see your deployed processes. And these environments such as like dev, QA stage production, all that information would be over here. And you would assign different items to it like servers. First basic step would be simply click on new, create an environment. Environment would be, let's give it a name as dev. Environment classification would be test. If you specify it as production, your cost SLAs and everything would be according to this environment classification. For lower environments, always be careful to use. Do not use production unless it's a production environment that you're configuring. Now again, another thing is you can also set up environment level restriction as suppose it's a production environment. You can just set up access to support like restrict the access for everyone on this. No, I'll explain this later properly. Now, setup preference. If you go for in the cloud or local, it would give you all these options. Basically, you download an installer and do the local setup. We would simply use Singapore Integration Cloud. It's the nearest data center available. We do that. Now your environment and your servers are unattached. Environment is somewhere your process would get deployed to. And test item is the server on which this deployed process would run upon. Basically, environment is where you deploy your processes. Now, what we simply did was we created a dev environment and we created a dev server for us to run our processes upon. Whatever applications you deploy would be deployed at environment level and where you would be able to configure its properties, basically all a process. If you want to perform some actions on it, which I'll explain later, test, you see this cloud icon. This is your server, Atom server, where your process would be running. This would have its basic information about your server. Basically, it belongs to which data center, which cloud. And when was your extensions last updated or date it was installed upon and the version of it. Environment classification, basic information. Log files. These log files are basically your server level logs. Process level logs. Whatever your integrations you are running, those would be in process reporting. These log files which you see for your server about the actions that are happening in it. Again, then you can select dates and everything. All this information. This is about your basic Atom information. Deploy processes for whatever the integrations that you have designed and those are deployed. You would see the whole list here and from here you will be able to configure these schedules as well. Like only from here you can configure the schedules, at what time you want them to run and everything. Listener says, basically your event-driven integrations, which the integration design pattern we were talking about. Where we expose Boomi as an API and configured in other application where they trigger the event. Those kind of event-driven integrations would be listed under here. All those deployed ones. Atom workers are basically something which you use for high performance. And basically you want to. Let me put it in something simple. Basically you have suppose and dozens and records flowing in. If you let the win and dozen records run one by one or something like that, it would take a lot of time. But you do, and you have a very restrictive window due to business hours. But now, what do you think of this? If you can run your records in parallel, like 5,000 records at once and another batch of 5,000 in parallel, they are running. This Atom workers come into play, then basically. It's for like enabling parallel processing in Boomi Cloud. You don't need to do anything. It is all managed by Boomi. Majorly, I'll explain in later with the shape and everything how we configure on this. But basically, it is for increasing your performance about your process and like how many records you want to process at once. That is the basic functionality about Atom workers. Queue management is basically, instead of for that MUM design pattern, that message oriented. Integrations. If you are using Boomi's queue service and everything, you would see the queue listed here and all this information. Otherwise, if you are using some third party, you would have it inside the process level only. Certificates are used here for authentication purposes. There could be cases where companies do not, instead of just using basic authentication or an OAuth or JWT. They also use certificate-based authentications. Here you can configure those certificates. By default, Boomi has already taken care of a lot of them publicly available ones. But then there are sometimes certificates which your company has created internally and you want to use them for authentication. Once you deploy them and everything, they would be available here. You deploy them using your in the process level only. Again, in the settings I had showed you about like uploading jar files. Whichever you have uploaded would be visible over here. Your jar files. Then talking about account properties, it's basically a configuration of if you want, suppose this is a dev environment, but if you are in production and your business wants data privacy, you can purge data, checkmark this, purge it immediately. Basically, once your integration has run, you will not be seeing any data in the locking. If you checkmark this, but if you keep this unchecked, you will be able to see whatever data is flowing through. If they have that business requirement of privacy, then you keep this checkmark. Another feature is purge history after exchange. Basically for how many days you want to hold your logs. Ideally, it is best to keep it for like 30 days. The support team or the level 2 development team, they have an option to check the logs in case of any failures. Suppose your integration has run 10,000 records came from source, but only like 9,000 went through to target. In 1,001 missed. But then again your business did not notice it for first few days. Only after like a week they found this discrepancy in their reports and everything. Then they come to the support team or to whoever is managing this Boomi services. Like why, where did it go missing and everything. There, this comes in handy to have your audit logs. All this logging enabled for like 30 days. But again, then it also depends upon your business and the architect or to decide for how many days they want to keep the logs for and be. That kind of things. Cloud attachment quotas is basically your default allowed quotas that are offered by Boomi. Again, like maximum size allowed, maximum document count, all this information we'll deep dive into each of it automatically later. Once we are running tests and everything, you will be seeing few of these errors. Then I would be explaining on this quotas and everything. Again, these were like basic properties for again, like for archiving, capturing few more metrics, time zones. For schedule, you can set it up for like components, logs, different kind of thing. All this you can control. and configure this rather than, just having a very basic one. We really use all this information. All of these advanced level configurations. We usually play around with purchase free after X days and purchase immediately. Sometimes, yes, we do have to look at these configurations where business proposed that it would be under this size limits, but something exceeded. There, you just come back to check how much quota is allocated for your account to check and all that. Otherwise, then basic tab, we do not move to these tabs. Rarely we get to use it. The next is shared web server. I told you about event-driven integrations where Boomi is exposed as a service to other applications. Like for some employee information or something, if there's any change to job, information or something. When you're exposing Boomi as an API, you need to configure its URL type of API in authentication. From this shared web server settings, again, since this is like a training account, all this is restricted. But when you purchase your account, even then, like you would see, like use default would be enabled and some URL like this would be there. Like CR1 integrate as Vumicom, that would be your API's host. Then you have your authentication type, which you can set to this. Otherwise, if you keep switching, playing around with it. Again, we will look into this later, API types and all. Basically, let me explain. Now I have created a token here. Basically, user job Workday which has this credential. The username would be job Workday. Token which I generated would be this. That would become like its password. And this would be the API based path. Basically, I would configure all this in another application's webhook. All this information. And again, I can set a restriction to just allow for this particular event integration that we designed. I do not want other processes to be using this user token. We can control that access for it. Does it make sense? Any questions, Far? I would take that as a no. Like I don't expect you to understand everything at once. It was just to give you a very brief overview. You know something like in bits and pieces. You would remember it for now. Later, once we start to use this, then it would be easier to I'd be able to catch on it. And I would be able to explain in little detail about all of this later. Now about the deployment page. Once you have designed your Boomi process, you know integration. It would have your connections, your profiles. You know it's an XML profile or a JSON file. And your whole process. All these are like individual units. You box all of it together. That is called packaging components, where your whole integration is packaged into a single box. You do that by clicking here. Here you would see your process. You click on that. You would just add basic information about version and some description if you want to. And you just package it and leave it here. Once you have your package components, now you know your box is ready. You deploy it using this. You click on Deploy Package Component, you would see a screen over here that you will be able to select whichever integration you want to deploy. And then you would get the option of selecting your environments, whatever you had created in your atom management. That is about seeing the deployments. There is a lot more. Once we deploy a process, I'll explain. Then again, your integration packs is basically if you hired another account in the organization before, you could get those integrations exported as integration packs and use it here. None of them are installed. We'll skip this for now. Then it's basically for using prepackaged integrations, which are either available by HumanEye for your account or you got them exported from your old account. That is about using these integration packs. Account dashboard. This would. Let me explain this also then. These dashboards are basically for seeing information about your services in general, like how your integrations are performing, how many errors you're seeing, or amount of data, or amount number of transactions that are passing through. And or like how much time your processes are getting executed. Or like if any of your atoms are offline, you can see all that information. You can control all this over here. TP dashboard is basically for seeing this status codes and all that. Like if it's success, authentication, failures or forbidden, all those like 401, 500, 200, 211, all that information you will be seeing. Real-time dashboard is basically for again seeing like reports about your processes. What is your average latency? Or execution status about your process, how it's running and everything. All these are for just metrics, reports, purposes under dashboard, all these three that you are seeing. That is the use case basically. If your business asks you like weekly reports once your integrations are live into production system, they want to know the metrics. This is from where you pull the information and share it across. This is your Boomi process library where you know your pre-designed integrations by Boomi are available. Like about your basic demos, everything. All this information would be available here. Or different kind of, prepackaged integrations that we were talking about, like where you don't need to design your integration. You just need to configure your credentials only for your APIs and you'll be done with it. There you can browse through the process library and do that. Now this is how you would do it, basically installing it. We'll just do this one Boomi basic demo to understand how it is done. Click on install, select your folder. That is done. Again, you will be able to apply all these filters. These will be coming in handy. Like later, when you have hundreds of processes and everything. You want to see sometimes only deployed component or undeployed component or select by various. If you want to just see if a particular component is in this particular folder or related to a particular process, that way you can control that information. Or if you want to just put up a filter on the component type, whichever you are designing, you can just select this filter from here. Or sometimes you just want to see the deleted components. You can do all that from these filters. Now here you will have these options of new component, new folder, rename permissions. Let's create a new folder, name it as demo. On this demo one again, I can create nested folders or directly create our Boomi components, which would be all of this. Any of it, we can select from the drop down and create that component. Another one is permissions. Again, I can restrict my folders by assigning them again roles. All this is also available. If I just click on this, only users with a standard user role would be able to access these folders. There is this feature of folder locking as well. If it is enabled. Let's see if we have this. Perfect. I think it is restricted in training account. Otherwise, you can also lock your components. Where no one else other than you or whom you get access to will be able to access this folder or a component. And finally, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.